How can you lead a more intuitive life? How can you follow your intuition both in your personal life and in your work? Before we explore the 5 core principles of your intuition, of following your own inner guidance, let's look at the definition of intuition. Intuition is the power or the ability of attaining direct knowledge without evident rational thought of and interference. So what happens is often when we have an intuitive answer, we doubt it because we don't have any tangible proof for it. And this is something you've probably experienced in your life and in your work where you've had a gut feeling that this is maybe something you should do or shouldn't do, but because you don't have any tangible proof for it, you don't follow your intuition. Most of the time, in those cases, we end up regretting not following our intuition and something else unfolds that proves that our intuition was correct, even though there wasn't any tangible proof for it. One of the main reasons for this is the subconscious mind is 90% of our thinking. So 90% of our thoughts aren't conscious, they're unconscious. This means that at any given moment, when you're thinking about something, there's only 10% that's from your conscious mind and your prefrontal cortex, and all the rest is hidden. And this part of your thinking is very much alive, and it's what gives you reflexes. For example, when you're walking in the street and you suddenly avoid something, you're not thinking consciously about it, you do it as a reflex. This is your subconscious mind that is guiding you. And, and this is the bit that interests me the most, this can help us with our decision making, with leading our life intuitively, with pretty much everything we do in our life. It's not just a matter of using our intuition and subconscious mind for reflexes on the street, but it's also something we can do when we have important decisions in our life. So let's explore the 5 core principles that we can follow to help us to tap into our intuition. The very first principle is permission and self-awareness. It all begins by giving yourself the permission to follow your intuition. And if this is not something that you're used to doing, it takes quite a lot of courage and quite a lot of practice, because on the moment, it might come in conflict with what your tangible, rational mind is telling you. Maybe you have this potential project or client that you could be working with, and your intuition is telling you not to do it. But everything from a tangible, logical, rational perspective is saying this is a great decision. So suddenly you have this inner conflict between your gut feeling, your intuition, and the external or other part of your brain that is logical and rational. So if you haven't given yourself the permission to lead a more intuitive life, every time you will have this type of inner conflict, you might end up following the logical, rational side of you because it feels safer. And this is something that is very important when it comes to intuition. Sometimes it doesn't feel that safe because it might be telling you, or you might have this inner feeling to do something that's radically out of your comfort zone, or to turn down something that looked like a great opportunity, or to explore a totally new approach of doing something in your business. But what you'll find time and time again, and Steve Jobs is a great example of this, is the people that were the most intuitive and the most innovative in their field, in their business, generally got the best results and faster because they weren't waiting for their logical brain and their prefrontal cortex to figure everything out. They were tuning into everything on multiple levels. This doesn't mean ignore totally your logical brain. There's a lot of great things we can do through our rational thinking and the prefrontal cortex, but it means don't rely only on this. And if you have this inner gut feeling or intuition to go in a totally different direction, listen. Listen and explore and give yourself the permission to listen to it. And I think this is something that we don't do often enough. Too often we have this gut feeling or intuition, we just push it away and we ignore it. And generally we come to regret this or to realize that that isn't quite as aligned as we want to. There's a reason that intuitively you feel drawn to certain projects and ideas and you feel aversion towards certain directions. So this is the first part of that core principle on permission and self-awareness. And the second aspect of this is that self-awareness piece. And this is being regularly in tune with your own thoughts, your feelings, your sensations, to understand what is most aligned with you. Once more, this is something we've learned to repress. Something doesn't feel right, let's ignore it. If we have too many thoughts on this topic, let's just distract ourselves. And if we don't have this inner self awareness and also self acceptance of all the different things going on in our inner world, then we can't follow our intuition because our intuition isn't clear enough. So it all begins by having this clear sense of self awareness. What's going on in my inner world? What are my thoughts on this topic? How do I feel in my body? One of the practices I started with when I was first training as a coach years and years and years ago was to tune in to my emotions in the body. Where do I feel this fear, the joy, anger, disappointment, upsetness, sadness, and sensing where does this come from in the different parts of my body. The coaching teacher back then would always ask us at the beginning of a class, what are you feeling right now? And where are you feeling it in your body? And this teaches you to practice tuning into this inner world and seeing what comes through. What are some of the core feelings and emotions? And the more we're in tune with our body, the more we're in tune with the different emotions and feelings and sensations that we have, the easier it is to hear that intuition, because it also often comes as a bodily sensation, that instant feeling of, oof, no, this is not the right thing to do or the right direction to go in. And so the more we are self-aware of how we feel in our body and the different thoughts that we have, but mostly the body, the emotions, the feelings, the sensations, the easier it is to tap into our intuition. Something that's really important here is that intuition doesn't mean not doing the things that are hard. So sometimes we might feel aversion and resistance to doing certain activities because they are highly demanding and they require a lot of energy and effort. When we don't feel like doing these things, that's not our intuition. That's just our body trying to preserve its energy and saying, okay, this requires quite a bit of effort. Let's not do it. Or maybe it can wait. That is not our intuition. Our intuition probably told us it is the right activity to do. And then our body is saying, oh, this is actually quite difficult. So let's not confuse a sort of inner laziness or complacency that comes from doing hard and challenging tasks, which following an intuition. Intuition actually often requires us to do things that are hard, out of our comfort zone, challenging, because it's looking at what would help us grow, develop the most, and what is aligned for us, what is aligned with our core values and principles. So this was the first key point, giving yourself the permission to lead an intuitive life and developing this sense of self-awareness, being in tune with your emotions and feelings. The second part is what I was saying right now, alignment. Once we start to notice these different feelings, we can also tune in and see, is this aligned with my values, my beliefs, what I feel is important? And there's a very simple tool and exercise that I often do with my clients, which is if you're at a crossroad and you're hesitating between two different directions, two different possibilities. Maybe it's between two different jobs. Maybe it's between living in two different countries. When this happens, you can visualize both of these scenarios, one after the next, and just see what happens in your body as you visualize yourself living in one country or living in the other country, and see, do you feel an expansion, an opening, a sense of joy or lightness, or do you feel your whole body closing down and it feels heavy and dense? Every single time I've done this exercise with some of my clients, they've come to a decision within seconds or minutes. And sometimes there has been a decision that has been weighing on their mind for months. So, by listening to your body, by having this somatic awareness, you can make decisions so much more effectively. The only thing is to trust that what your body says is aligned and will lead you to the best outcomes. And the only way you can know this is by continuously following that intuitive somatic bodily response and seeing time and time again, it worked out. That was what was best for me in that moment. That was what was most aligned for me. So the more we trust, the more we develop this inner trust. On the other hand, if you feel somatically in your body that this isn't the right decision and you still do it, you start to lack this inner trust because your body is sending you signals that this is not the right direction to go in and you're ignoring it. Then this starts to break your inner trust with yourself, and this diminishes your sense of intuition. Noticing when you're opening up and expanding or closing down and it feels heavy is one of the most powerful tools, both for decision making, but also just for how you lead your life every single moment. Does it give you a sense of joy? Does it give you a sense of abundance and expansion? Or are you feeling constantly closed down? And in certain periods of our life, sometimes we're feeling constantly shut down and drained and heavy, and we can flip this. But to flip it, we need to tune in and see what would make us feel more expansive in this current situation. What would shift our energy here? So, in this second core principle of leading an intuitive life, there's this notion of alignment and there's this notion of energy. Follow what energizes you most. Of course, this is within reason. Maybe you get super energized by playing and doing watercolors all day or playing music, and you still have work to go to. So, I'm not saying just stop all your responsibilities and just play the piano 24/7. I'm not inviting people to lead a life irresponsibly or their work irresponsibly, but it's maybe more in your work, in your day to day, what is calling you? What is giving you that joy and energy? Can you do a bit more of this? Can you work a bit more from your zone of genius, which is a fantastic concept by Gay Hendricks in The Big Leap? And it's this idea that it's an activity or several activities that you both really, really enjoy and that where you really have a high level of expertise. So high enjoyment, high expertise, that's your zone of genius. The more time, the more energy, the more focus you have in activities in the zone of genius, the more energizing it is. And from this place of high energy, it's a lot easier to lead an intuitive, aligned life because you have more energy and things come more easily. And even if challenging circumstances occur, you're able to deal with them better. You have greater resilience. So there's a lot of amazing things that happen when we tune in to our intuition. So this was the second core principle, this notion of alignment, noticing when you open up and close down, and following what energizes you. The third principle, and this is one I worked on a lot, is slowing down and reflection. Because the truth is, intuition is more like a small, subtle voice. And if you're rushing all the time and you're doing everything in a very busy, hectic pace, you won't hear your intuition because it will be whispering different thoughts, ideas, concept, but you're so busy rushing and being busy that you don't hear what's coming through. So without slowing down, it's not possible to lead an intuitive life. This is why probably the people that you're thinking about, maybe certain people like Eckhart Tolle or Michael Singer and different spiritual teachers out there, they have a slower, calmer energy. Now, you also have people like Tony Robbins that I believe is highly in tune with his intuition, and he's more fast paced and energetic and maybe doesn't slow down as much. Yet, I'm sure he's found ways to tap into his reflection, to find ways to slow down in different moments in order to hear his intuition more strongly. So it's worth considering what helps you to slow down, what are certain habits you can put in practice to have a bit of a slower pace, to not feel constantly rushed, and to allow for this intuition to come through. And from this place of deeper reflection, you can start to use inquiry. And inquiry is when you directly ask yourself, what would make this next step easier? What is most aligned for me right now? What is alive in me at the moment? What am I guided to be doing? What is something I can put in place to overcome this obstacle? What is something that I've been putting on hold for too long and it's time for me to take action? All of these different questions you can tune into and ask yourself from this place of deeper reflection, more space, more slowing down, and this inquiry will give you certain answers. Most of the time, we ask ourselves the wrong questions. We ask ourselves, why is this so bad? Why is this always happening to me? Why can't this work? And if you ask a question to your mind, the mind will give you the answer. So if you're constantly asking, why is this so bad? The mind will confirm that everything is bad. This is why the self-awareness part and being aware of your own thoughts is so important. On the other hand, if you start to develop the ability to ask yourselves more powerful, open questions, such as, what are my next steps? What is most aligned for me now? How can I slow down? What are some habits and practices I can put in place to help me be more grounded? What are some tools or activities I can do to make me feel more energized throughout the day? When you start to ask these questions, you start to get those answers. And this is how you can develop your own toolbox of what is best for you. Because we all have our answers. We all have the inner answers to all of our questions. I guarantee that any specific problem you're struggling with, maybe in terms of your business or your work, maybe it's work overload or delegating to different people or managing a relationship with a co-founder or finding a new innovative strategy about your business direction, all of these different things, you have the answers within you what to do. The only thing lacking is clarity that you get by slowing down and courage to then do it. Those are two very different things, but first we need the clarity from slowing down and reflection. And once we have that clarity, then it takes courage to take the actions. And this is actually the fourth principle here on leading an intuitive life, which is the courage to follow your instincts. There's this great quote by Oprah Winfrey, which is, follow your instincts. That's where true wisdom manifests itself. That's all said in that one sentence. Follow your instincts. That's where true wisdom manifests itself. Once you have that inner clarity through slowing down, by then following that gut feeling, taking action, being brave, honoring that intuition, honoring your true self, it takes courage. There's this great sentence that I often quote, which is that all growth is a leap in the dark. Every time you grow, every time you do something totally out of your comfort zone, it's a leap in the dark because there's uncertainty. You don't know what the outcome will be because you haven't done it until now. Courage is a habit. I'll say that again. Courage is a habit. If every single time you're clear on an aligned action, on something that feels aligned, that feels for your greater self, for the greater good, and you feel this little fear, maybe it's having a tough conversation, maybe it's stepping up and standing up for what you believe in, maybe it's holding a workshop in a new space, maybe you haven't spoken in public before, all these different bits and pieces that feel challenging and out of the comfort zone. If every single time you follow that intuitive calling, you follow that aligned action and you do it, you develop the habit of courage. Because courage is simply taking action in spite of fear. So if every time you feel fear, again, for something aligned, I'm not saying jump off a bridge, that is normal fear to keep you alive, but I'm saying maybe reach out to that person that intimidates you, maybe ask this other person for a favor, maybe put down some boundaries here with your boss or your colleagues or your co-founder. These things take courage. And when we develop the habit to take action in spite of that fear, we become braver, because then we know we can trust ourselves to take courageous action because we've done it in the past and we've survived and we've realized that it felt great, because often it's highly rewarding when we do these things. So let's do it again. Courage is highly linked to leading an intuitive life because, as I said earlier, the prefrontal cortex, the rational mind, likes to have things certain, likes to have that logic and rational aspect in place, and it can feel scary each time your intuition says, oh, let's go this other way. Let's focus on this instead. And then it takes a lot of courage to think, you know what? Deep down, my intuition, my gut feeling is telling me to go another way, and I will honor it and follow it. And this comes from aligning with your values, your beliefs, yourself, your soul, if you like to see it from a spiritual perspective. It doesn't really matter what you call it. The principle is always the same, which is tuning in, seeing what comes up, and following that, and being able to distinguish the difference between an intuitive voice and maybe a fear driven voice or a lazy voice. Because sometimes, let's say in a challenging circumstance, the fear voice might tell you, no, no, don't do that project. But the intuition is still saying, yes, this is great. So learning to distinguish between when it's fear driven and when it's intuitive driven. What I've noticed is that intuitive inner guidance doesn't shout or panic or go fast. So if you have a sudden like, oh no, no, I shouldn't do that, it's too scary, it's too hard, that's not the intuition. The intuition will more be, if it's telling you not to do something, for instance, it'll more be grounded, like, no, this doesn't feel right. Very grounded and calm. But this all comes from developing this self-awareness and really listening what is coming through. So the beginning, it can feel a bit confusing. How can I tell the difference between the fear-driven voice, the laziness, the intuition? I have all these different thoughts. I don't know which one is my intuition. But the more you ask, the more you do inquiry, the more you slow down, allow space. Guarantee that if you do a Vipassana or several day meditation retreat, your intuition will expand because you've given it space. And then you're able to distinguish the difference between that fear driven voice and the intuition. And this is related to something that I think about a lot, which is shifting from fear to trust. Often, our logical mind is fear based. Not always, but quite often there's a part of fear. When you're hesitating to take a project or not, and it doesn't feel quite aligned, it's fear telling you, yeah, take it because whatever, it's a good project and it'll be a great income or something like that, or it's a good opportunity. But trust is from the intuition, and then it'll say yes or no. And what you'll see is that if you fully trust and it says no to this project, within a few weeks or within a few months, another great opportunity will arise that feels totally aligned and that you love. But had you accepted that first project, you wouldn't have had space for this next one. Being able to shift from fear to trust is also something that takes a lot of practice. I practice every single day. I just try and hear, is this coming from a place of fear or is this coming from a place of trust? And if it comes from a place of fear, I don't allow it to take over and monopolize my thoughts. But if it's coming from a place of trust, of deep trust, of inner guidance, then I will follow it. Again, still within reason. So if your intuition is suddenly telling you to quit your job tomorrow, that might be great, and maybe it works, or maybe it's okay, quitting it soon and having a backup plan at the same time. So I'm not saying to blindly follow our intuition. I'm just saying to listen very carefully to the intuition, see if it comes from a place of trust, and then you can add a bit of the logical mind and make both meet, but don't totally squash the intuition because generally that's what leads to regrets. So trust that it's okay not to have all the answers and embrace that uncertainty that often comes from these big leaps. This is still within the fourth principle of courage. We want to embrace this uncertainty, know that all growth is a leap in the dark, and be okay with that. And then let your intuition guide you through ambiguity. A lot of amazing things start to happen when you do that on so many different levels. One aspect is that you develop greater inner trust because you notice that you're following your inner guidance. You also become a lot calmer because you trust a lot more in the path that is unfolding in life around you. There's a sense of calmness, of groundedness, of things will go a certain way and we can adapt around them. A greater compassion for yourself, for life, for the journey, for other people. And you also become more confident because if you're taking courageous leaps over and over again by following your intuition and then it works out, that builds also your confidence. Our confidence gets destroyed when our inner trust is diminished, and this happens when we don't follow our intuition. And the fifth principle, the last principle, is being open to receive. This comes from letting go of all overthinking and embracing the decisions that feel right and wrong, and noticing when you have this intuition, being open to receiving it. I love this Taoist concept called Wu Wei, and this can really help us to feel what is most aligned, what is most in flow. Does this feel like I'm forcing too much things, or am I going more with my inner flow, more with the flow of life? This takes a lot of practice. Everything I've mentioned takes practice because it's not something everyone is always accustomed to doing. But once you start to do this, sort of wu wei versus force versus flow, you will start to notice that certain things just flow better. And again, it doesn't mean being complacent. It doesn't mean just doing the easy things. It means following that inner flow, that inner guidance, that alignment with life. And being open to noticing also certain signs, certain synchronicities, paying attention to them. Because if you don't pay attention to them, you won't see what signs are coming up that you could be using to guide your intuition, to guide your life. Because intuition is both within, but it's also around us. It's also noticing if someone mentions one book to you 5 times, 5 different people mention one book during the course of a week, maybe it's time that you read that book. You can choose to interpret it as you wish. You can choose to see this as a coincidence if you want to, or you can choose to see that somehow life is communicating with you and that you can take these signs on board. I had an example of this yesterday, twice in the same day. This random book that I never heard of before appeared in my life. Once through a sign in the street, and the other in a book I was reading. And this was sort of, interesting, never heard of this book. And suddenly it's just there in my field. And this is something that I generally take quite seriously because I've noticed that when I listen to these signs and synchronicities, some amazing things then happen and follow. Maybe it's connecting with that person or reading that book or going to that event or checking out that working environment or traveling to that place. It always leads to something really wonderful when I listen to these signs and synchronicities, which is why I'd say this fifth principle of being open to receive and not being so close minded about it, not shutting it down, even if we don't always understand it from a logical perspective. And I have an engineering background and I studied a lot of maths and physics, so I understand this logical side. Even if we don't always understand it, maybe there's something here. Maybe there's something that I can be a little more open to receive. So let's quickly review the 5 core principles. The first one is permission and awareness, giving ourselves the permission to lead an intuitive life, even if it takes courage, even if it isn't always certain, but having this awareness and having the self ability to notice your own feelings and emotion. The second principle is alignment and following the high level of energy. Noticing when your body expands and closes down, when it feels light, when it feels heavy, and being able to follow what energizes you most, tuning in to things that give you greater energy. The third principle, and probably one of the most important, is slowing down. Slowing down, allowing more space for reflection and inquiry, because from this place, that's where intuition can really flow and flourish, and you can hear it more clearly. The fourth principle is courage, because leading an intuitive life takes courage, takes tremendous amount of courage. So knowing that all growth is a leap in the dark and honoring this intuition and honoring the guidance that you're feeling in spite of certain fears, shifting from this place of fear to the place of trust. And the fifth principle, being open to receive. Notice these signs and synchronicities, play with them, be open to them, follow them, even if it doesn't always make sense. See what comes of it. Having this openness can really help you to expand and follow an intuitive life. Really curious to hear what comes to your mind when you think of leading an intuitive life. How has this helped you? Feel free to comment here on the LinkedIn Live or also the podcast on YouTube. I'm really curious to hear what is it for you And how can you start to lead more of an intuitive life? Thank you so much for joining me today. Real pleasure to be here, talk about one of my most favorite topics on leading an intuitive life. Wishing you a wonderful day.